Welcome to PhD Positivity Hack delivered by myself, Beata Young. I'm speaking from sunny Valletta, and Dr. Jacqui Taylor. Welcome very much. Welcome to this beautiful surroundings. Dr. Jacqui Taylor has joined me from London, and she's been recognized in 2016 as one of the 100 most powerful UK entrepreneurs, awarded Honorary Doctorate of Science in recognition of her web science research. And actually, Dr. Jacqui, I met while I was in London last year. I attended a conference on security, and actually I was introduced to this conference, and I was encouraged to go to this conference by a friend of my fellow Malta Business Network director, and he told me, you've got to go because she's amazing, and he actually forced us to create this panel, which is Women in Tech panel. So kudos to you, Dr. Jacqui. Well done, because I think it's vitally important to have a female-centered topic. And before we delve into the data science or into privacy, how to secure our privacy during this very, very difficult times when we are trying to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 in our lives, and we are trying to have like a mirror world, and we have our twin cities, and we've got kind of simulate our life online. So Dr. Jacqui, could you tell us a little bit about how you started? What brought you to this career?
So delighted to be here. Hello, everybody. I think for me, the beginnings always influence the end, and no part of anybody's journey, I believe, is wasted, because I believe we learn along the way. I had the start of my career was interrupted in the death of my mum, and the need then to obviously focus on what matters and family. And I think in this current time, most people will agree, when we've understood what matters, it's family and our friends. And so I was unable to finish my education, took a year out to retake my exams I'd failed whilst I was looking after my family. And then I spent 2 years where I had an option to work, because I didn't have the option of going on to further study, and I worked full time. I studied on a Tuesday and a Thursday every week, straight after work. I studied all day Saturday, and I worked all day Sunday to actually get my assignments in. That allowed me to then go and do my my undergraduate studies. But my family still needed me, so there was a trade-off between what I needed to do, and essentially I decided on a career as an aerospace in aerospace engineering, and my company very kindly, because they understood the family situation, sponsored me to study locally. But locally was a 4-hour round trip every day. So for 3 years I did that 4-hour round trip and studied to get my studies. The reality of it was, though, that engineering study was around something that my company asked me to look at, and that was to solve the noise pollution that our aircraft industry was creating in our cities. So today I'm the world's first smart city czar, and I would say that my journey's been one of 36 years, which is usually something people go, what? But the reality of it was, yes, as an engineer, I was looking at the engineering discipline, but at my first real sort of innovation was on the societal impact of our industry. And unfortunately, when I finished my study, which I did with spectacular success, I was unable to carry on with that career, because as a female and with orders in from a Middle East client, that was not something that was deemed appropriate by the client for a female to work on. So I was asked to take a 6-week project in the computing department, as it was called at the time, and essentially brought some engineering discipline to that process, which quite frankly horrified me. The engineering discipline is very structured, and what I found in computing at that time was anything far from structured. But that company was one of the companies that pioneered software engineering. And if I fast forward 36 years to now, the company I run today, Flying Binary, changes the world with deep technology, which is what we're here to talk about today. And essentially what deep tech is about, it's about the combination of engineering and deep science. And the science is science that we've invented. I'm an international web scientist. I met Sir Tim Berners-Lee 9 years ago, where he invented the concept of a new science that would help take the World Wide Web as it was at that time at 20 years old, and to support the World Wide Web to support humanity and its own truth. And essentially that deep tech was born 36 years ago from the engineering disciplines that I studied for, but it needed a technology career of, you know, many facets in order to bring those two things together. And so Flying Binary today is one of the top 10 Internet of Things innovators, or I'm one of the top 10 Internet of Things innovators to look at the industrial level of that deep tech, which is, I think, the connection when you and I met, and looking at what we as women bring as a contribution and as a value to that world of the industrial Internet of Things. So that brings everybody that's watching full circle to where we met and why, I think. And that was why that panel was important.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you. It was very interesting topic, but unfortunately, and I think we quickly realized it was not only badly designed. I mean, in terms of the topic, the number of men there was 1 man and about 5 females, and the problem was, I think, the problem was, which is so often at the conferences worldwide, is they put us at the very end of the conference. So, and it's like, you know, you've got this little niche and you talk about, and we are half of the population, we are not even a niche. So why is it important to have a topic that appeals to everybody, and it's not like it's not female centric per se? Because the future of female entrepreneurship, the future of women in tech depends on everybody involved, right? Because it's not just us who have to fight for it, it's everybody who wants to have a great technological products, everybody who wants to have artificial intelligence that is intelligent and is not repeating human bias.
And I think that that's a really important piece. I think one of the things I would say, though, is we have increasingly discourse since I formed Flying Binary 11 years ago around the lack of women in tech. And I think to some extent that's the wrong conversation, because we don't, for our young entrepreneurs, our young female entrepreneurs, they don't actually come at it from the technical point of view. And, you know, the tech as the outcome has largely been the conversation. More tech, different tech, this year's latest tech, when actually female entrepreneurs will respond to solving problems where technology is the enabler. So I've tended to change the conversation around women in tech, around what problems it can solve and how you can leverage technology. That doesn't mean to say you need to be a CEO of a company like I am. I mean, if you're not an engineer, why would you care potentially? But you can, but many female CEOs understand the value of technology and are looking to actually use that technology to enable a change in outcomes for their customers. But most of us have a societal focus, like I spoke about, 36 years ago. We all understand that if we remake our world with technology, make it a world that we want to live in, let's understand the societal impact of what technology's done, and then and change the focus. If we change the focus away from technology as an outcome in itself, this tech, that tech, and what have you, but we actually articulate the problems it solves and the benefits it brings and the outcomes it can change, then suddenly women are interested in tech, and you know, we get more of a rounded discussion like you're talking about, because we are 50% of the population. But we don't always have to be at the sharp end with tech the way I am. That's not necessary. But we need much more of, our organization is a meritocracy, and web science itself as a discipline, which we invented 11 years ago, as a discipline is a multidiscipline study. So when you get doctoral training centers for our PhDs in web science, they can be mathematicians, quantum physicists, engineers, all the disciplines, because what we're all engaged in is that change we bring to society, leverage the technology in order to create a better world, which sounds very nirvana, but that genuinely is what we're doing.
It's actually, you know, this is the topic of what I've been passionate about for a couple of last years. Like I've started this community back in 2013 back in Poland. I'm Polish by origin, and actually what really strikes me, quite quickly I discovered that we need more female leaders, women that are role models, and women who can take that and make that move, and sometimes leave that comfort zone, however you call it, whether it's comfort zone, whether it's your house, and actually start small steps, because they lead to big changes. So I'm really thrilled about this topic, and about actually what COVID brings, because I think there is more people now becoming tech savvy because of the fact that we have to somehow communicate. And actually I've been chatting to directors of Malta Business Network, and they usually were very averse to using technology, but now to have meetings you've got to invent some way of communicating. And so, but there are some threats, and this is actually why I called this topic, is privacy dead? 2020 is the year of privacy dead, and it's not going to be as we knew it back then. And actually I was referring this afternoon to a video which was reflecting on how many changes in our daily life 9/11 brought, and how much travel was impacted by that fact. Is it going to be a story repeated, or is it going to be even worse scenario? How do you feel? What's the future?
So I'm an expert advisor to the G20, and before the whole of the COVID thing was really, well, way before we knew about COVID, and we were already envisioning the new future. So I was brought on board to look at creating a global plan that each of the G20 economies could leverage to cite a new future. And the basis of that plan wasn't diversity, but was inclusion, and understanding that unless we bring all of our talents to the table, this complex industrial Internet of Things world I talk about is actually not going to be something that benefits many. And in some respects, it does benefit more of us, because unlike the digital transformation that's gone on, where the focus has been transforming what we do, but technology being the outcome and the conversation about being tech, unless you've got deep science experience and you've got deep engineering experience, industrial Internet of Things is a closed door for most people. And therefore, it's about that approach. And so the G20 plan that I constructed in order to say, well, the G20 economies are here today, where might they go, what might be the ambition, was obviously a growth plan, because that's obviously what we would do at that level. But it also articulated how an inclusion agenda would deliver those changed outcomes, and effectively create a society for those of our social generations that effectively would be the main driver for it. So the evidence I produced at Davos in January 2019 was about that change. And my web science research has always been, pre-2009 when I formed the company, has always been for Generation Z. So if you're watching today, you're Gen Z, you're between the ages of 27 and 17. What you may not know, but as a result of my G20 work, is that you already influence 40% of the economic spend across the world. The G20 countries are 60% of the world's GDP. So you already are making your presence felt. We have lots of conversation about Gen X and Gen Y and the millennials, but actually Generation Z are particularly part of that influence. And then the customers that we build for, I announced at Davos in 2019 in January, was Generation Alpha. So the customers we build for today are between the ages of 16 and 6. And that is because those social generations are already influencing and have a different dynamic in an online world. So you're right to take it back, Beta, to 9/11. You can also relate it back to the financial crash, but you know, take it back to 9/11. Millennials were not influencing the way the world works. Take it back to the financial crash. That was where they started their major influence. Take it back to our, what I'm calling the isolation economy, the COVID crisis. Actually, it's Generation Z that are influencing it. And why does that matter? Because their way of curating their talents in the world is very different. They are our web entrepreneurs. They have never known anything different, as I say, between the ages of 27 and 17. And for them, this is about utilizing tech to change outcomes. And so it's interesting, the comparisons, but the dynamic that really will influence it, in my view, is the fact that we have moved a generation who are much more inclusive, who think about this world in a globalized way, and they have no qualms or there's no hive mind, there's no echo chamber. They are literally inclusive and connect their networks. And people say to me, well, I'm not quite sure you're right, Jacqui. And I say, well, fair enough, you know, you're entitled to your view, but mine's based on science, mine's based on evidence. But I can give you a real life example. Greta Thunberg is a climate activist who's very passionate about the world she wants to see. And she has not largely interfaced with any of our institutions, done anything in any traditional way, but what impact has she had? And if you want to see what that looks like, then see, you know, watch her, follow her. Now, the customers we are building for is Gen Alpha 16 to 6. They are a new breed again. But again, they're global citizens. They are looking to deliver their value in the world, but they assume that technology is going to give them better outcomes, or they won't use it. And so I think that the isolation economy is actually a very different, we're at an inflection point. And if I can just sort of put that in my web science research perspective, my web science research takes us from 400 BC through to 2400. And that actually articulated around 400-year cycles of change. So take us back 800 years, the signing of the Magna Carta, the generation of the Anglosphere economies and everything that went through. 400 years ago, the War of Independence of America formed itself as a new economy in its own right. And then now, this is just about 400 years on, and I believe that the isolation economy is our next, what I call nexus point, our next change. But the key thing is the generation that influence it directly, Generation Z, are a very different cohort that look at the world in a more inclusive way. So I think it's going to be a very different future.
It certainly is not going to be back to normal because there is no normal anymore.
No,
and
no.
I like the idea about reflecting on the history, because one of my scenes, I actually studied history, so I'm always humbled by the history, what it brings to us, and being Pole, you know, it definitely resonates with me a lot. So, but also, I think I would like to reflect on my husband's speech. One of his speeches, actually, the child that is born today is going to look so much different. He's not going to have a driving license because he's going to drive driverless car. So it's really the concept of, we still think the way we live today, we can't really switch off what our backgrounds are. And actually, it's quite funny because a couple of years back, I visited the history museum of DDR in Germany, in Berlin, and my daughter was like asking me, how is it possible we didn't have Walkmans, and how is it possible we only had one radio channel? So it's all very fascinating when you look at the history of things, and how people were saying that television will kill the radio, but podcasts are somehow the new big wave. So it's always very, very fascinating. And I would like to again encourage our audience to ask questions, because if there is anything uncertain, or there is any topic that you would like to discuss with Dr. Jacqui, you are more than welcome. We welcome your questions. And I actually have got a question from one of our avid supporters. She's a mother. She didn't want to appear. And because the topic is privacy, she felt it's much better to send me a question via email, which is fine too. My kids have access to the internet. I'm working from home, but I have no chance to check what pages he is opening. How to control it?
Right, well, I'm going to make an assumption that your child is actually Gen Alpha, so under the age of 16. And in that case, they will not respond to control. They will respond to challenge, but not control. And so what we have to do often is be the example we want them to follow, but it forms a negotiation with them, because for them as a generation, they know no different, and they are connected with a tribe that they've never met, and that is the way they live their lives. And so thank you for that, Olga. Lovely comment there. And so from a parenting of Gen Alpha perspective, it's actually about negotiation and collaboration. Now, in assisting a mum who reached out to me this week, who is a mother of triplets, they're 6, to discover that she came down in the morning with her husband. They were dressed, they were breakfasted, they had a pad, they had a pen, and as far as they were concerned, mum and dad, sit down. You've had 5 weeks in isolation. It's not going well. This is how it's going to work. Dad, your writing's better. We suggest you sit down and take the notes. So I said to Sam, what did you do? And she said, I did as I was told. And I said, good decision, because actually Gen Alpha have no boundaries that they know about other than the structures they respect. And so we have to, as parents, I parented a Gen Z, we have to, as parents, set that up as a negotiation. But also, as her husband said to me, we had to realize that some of our behaviors needed a structure too, because we weren't being structured in how we do things. So it's difficult. I would absolutely say that the challenge you're articulating is something that every parent of Gen Alpha faces. And I would say that it is about the individuals. There is a difference between the boys and the girls in the way that they negotiate, but actually you can have a very adult conversation with them. I have my youngest entrepreneur is 5. He's set in the world of the gaming industry alight, and I would sit down and have a proper adult conversation and make some formal structure around what you agree is the right way to be. But unless you can set parental controls in whatever devices you have, and you can do that, but that will require some work, then there's going to be an element of trust in there. And then obviously you can look at, from whatever device they're using, depending on your browser, you can look at what history there is as to whether there's actually a problem. But don't necessarily assume there is a problem. And then the final thing I would say is always, because Gen Alpha are very inclusive, always look to their association and their friends, the things that they're interested in, because often you'll find that they attract like with like, usually in quite large numbers. So they have usually a large collective of friends who are slightly different. But if you're worried about some of their friends, you should be worried about some of the content. And that's something that normally I would take 2 hours to talk about, but hopefully I've been succinct and given you some ideas about how to start with that. But they are an amazing generation, and putting some controls around them won't work, but actually won't get you anywhere. So a different approach required.
Oh, absolutely. Having a partner, treating your child like a partner, and actually explaining the threats is critical. And there are ways. So, for example, because I used to live in London for 2 years, my daughter was 7 at a time, and you know, being in London, north part of London, it's a bit tricky. So, how do you prepare your child? And I actually talked about, you know, and even we tried, and I tried to kidnap her, and she thought, you know, I'm going to kick you off. And actually she was, you know, vulnerable. She couldn't do anything. And I told her, in case anything happens, in case there are too many questions, you can always say, I don't know, but I'll ask my mother, and I'm sure she will reply to you. So that's a good answer to whoever is asking questions. And it's not my idea, but I actually have heard it somewhere, and it works wonders. If you teach your child to say, I don't know, but I'll ask my mother and she will tell you, is a good line. And when we talk about online life and using your devices, it actually brings the story of Melinda Gates, who said it's always tricky with them, you know, being technologists at heart and using lots of devices. They actually set rules, and there is no phones used during a dinner table, and these rules definitely help the whole family to have a quality time. So Jacqui, Dr. Jacqui, I would like to also touch upon the biggest threats that's been actually before COVID-19 happened, the deep fake. And maybe if you could explain a little bit about the basis and what happens in this world of deep fake to some of our audience. Majority should know what the topic is, but just to make sure everybody understands what's the threat.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about any of the technologies where we're creating an immersion experience, the reason for the immersion experience, why do we have this, is because Generation Z are they're not a visual generation as the millennials are. They're a kinesthetic generation. So their skills and their talents are unlocked by immersion, by touch, and being part of a reality. So things like mirror worlds and digital twins and deep fakes, you should expect that going forward. As a cohort that's influencing 40% of the economic spend across the world, they are part of, you know, they're an audience, they're a customer base that these technologies are being created for. When you talk about something like the digital twins, where we're actually physically creating a virtual world on actual real places and, you know, bridges and buildings and all the rest of it, that tends to blend lots of different technologies. I've mentioned a few, you know, the Internet of Things and sensors, robotics, and then obviously artificial intelligence. And I think one of the things I want to say before I get into deepfake itself is artificial intelligence, AI, is an amazing technology where some of the hardest problems we have to tackle are things that we can have machines do the heavy lift and shift. When we build artificial intelligence in Flying Binary, we build what's called advisory AI, because the industrial Internet of Things for us as an inclusion agenda is around the human at the heart of it, the decisions being taken by the human, the robots or the services doing the heavy lift and shift, the enablement on our behalf. There is something you will hear about called adversarial AI, where it's being built to do the absolute opposite. So let's make those distinctions now. But in terms of deep fake and around the whole VR, virtual reality, augmented reality, and then the sort of general reality pieces, this is around this immersion experience that I described before for Generation Z. And essentially using AI, because the facial recognition capabilities, if that's what you're building for and training an AI model to do, actually allow you to create a reality that isn't there. And one of the ones that people ask me about all the time is the Barack Obama and the Jordan Peele one, where the deep fake was actually Jordan Peele acting as Barack Obama, saying things that Barack Obama would say, interspersed with things that he wouldn't say. So that's why I think Beta, you've actually got a point about, is this a year privacy dive? People predict that all the time, and obviously it's a great title to get people to know the context of what we're discussing. But essentially it evolves, it always evolves, and anything around deep fake that actually attacks in an adversarial point of view, an adversarial AI point of view, or it alters a reality, if it's not done from a privacy preserving perspective, i.e. I respect you, that and I expect what I do to continue and demonstrate that respect, that human construct, then we should always query it. And often with technologies like this, when they're in their infancy, which largely they still are, then it's an explore space. But as technologists, I'm one of the original 250 technologists that founded the digital economy in the UK, and we now have 6.5 million companies built out of that seed in London, 33 hubs in the UK. We have always had a key piece of what we do as technologists, which is more than our philosophy. It's the reason we do what we do. We've always felt a responsibility and an accountability for what we build. So while, you know, the facial recognition technologies that are being used on the platforms, that are being developed as services, that are being put into the consumer's hands, actually have a specific use case, what I would like to say is most of us, very much almost all of us across the world, have in mind an understanding of whether it's ethical, whether it's moral, and whether it's privacy preserving. And that's when we talk about privacy, we can have debates about privacy, but that's usually around how something does something. And what I talk about is the outcome. Is it privacy preserving to do what that's done? And deep fake, I think the Barack Obama deep fake shocked people. The idea that the 44th president could say things seemingly that actually in his voice, in the way, his mannerisms, and actually it wasn't him, began to move into that adversarial AI. And all of this is a spectrum. And if we talk about advisory AI versus adversarial AI, deep fake is very much towards that adversarial AI, unless you are going with a very strong ethical and looking at the bias that's in the human bias that's inherent in what you do, which is why the inclusion agenda matters so much, because the more holistic you are in the way you approach your technology and the way you build your technology, the more inclusive you are with the people that are involved in that, the more likely you are to be able to challenge that bias when you're building the models, training the models, deploying the models. So quite a long explanation there, but I think it's something that I like to think. I like to introduce when I have the opportunity, because this is, if you're raising Gen Alpha like that lady was before, this is your world now. Whether you know it or not, this is your world. This is being built for your children because that's the way they learn. And so I think all of us have a responsibility to understand the issues around this, but to be able to realize it exists and then try to look at what the motivation is behind something that we see, because that will give you an idea of whether we're in the adversarial spectrum or the advisory spectrum. And so challenge it. That's the human piece.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And look at the knife. It's the device that cuts the bread, and you can feed yourself, but it can also serve as a weapon. So it's really for the human to use it to good. And we had discussion about artificial intelligence, how it's going to destroy the nations, how technology is going to destroy the nation. And I would call it Generation MTV. And I remember how I was
Yeah.
watching MTV after the collapse of Berlin Wall. That was the closest thing I could get to the abroad and feeling that wave of new coming. And people were scared, you know, what is going to come up out of these MTV people, because there was so much sexual things and moves and Bravo Girl. At the time it wasn't my popular, but I remember, you know, all these topics about talking first night and stuff, and somehow we are here. We are not killing people, we are not prostituting, and you know, this is how you make your life meaningful, and this is up to you whether you use it for good or bad. And
I think that's an important point. It's a neutral thing. Technology is neutral, but it's the human that decides where it is on the advisory to adversarial scale. And I think the other thing about that is true what you say, but when you think of it in the context of Generation Z, their motivations, their inspirations, their missions are very different to the previous generations, the millennials. So the impact is going to be very different. And they are less likely to consult us or respect any of the institutions that don't meet those ambitions. So I think that the COVID, the isolation economy as we have now, the COVID crisis has caused us to spotlight and question some of these things. But usually Generation Z asks no permission, they just do. And they can, and they're quite capable of doing it themselves.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And actually, Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired, said AR, artificial augmented reality, will spark the next big tech platform, call it mirror world, as we mentioned. Someday soon, every place and thing in the real world, and that was article written in 2019, every street, lamppost, building, and room will have its full-size digital twin in the mirror world. And one of the examples I think is, it's a perfect example, is Google Earth, because actually I'm thinking about some books that have been written about some exotic places, and the author has never been there, and they visualize everything based on Google Earth. And when we are talking about the different generations, I think the fair mention should go to Pokemon Go, because that's a perfect example of mirror world, where lots of generations started playing this weird Pokemon play, and they see new places. And actually, this is what I love about Pokemon Go, because every so often I'm still checking on the development of my favorite game, that I managed to lure some of the Pokemon goers to one of my businesses back in Poland, which was a cafe digital hub. And actually, they love it because it gives them the sense of belonging. It gives them the exploratory mission. They explore new things. They also make friends. So they see new world because the friends send to each other presents. So that's the example, and that's what we adults of all ages should embrace, and see that word as some opportunity we should explore. Which brings me to question from Olga Vasina. She's asking, so how can entrepreneurs from different generations interact with these brave new tribes of youth and young adults?
Okay, that's a great question. That is a great question. So obviously, in preparing the digital economy plans for the G20, there were very few of those new tribes that were part of that before I walked in the door. But when I walked out of the door, they were embedded in the process. And I think that one of the things that's useful to say is they tend to be entrepreneurial by approach, not because they're actually entrepreneurs, but they have that entrepreneurial thinking. And so therefore, it's about how we, who are not Gen Z or Gen Alpha, facilitate that. So we're generally known as digital shapers, Olga. And what we do is we have to articulate the value we bring to be part of that interaction, because without it, we would not be invited. So one of the things I did when I spoke at Davos was to say, I was speaking about the future of the cybersecurity industry, which doesn't have a future. And so I chose to illustrate that with the views of 2 million young people, these new tribes that we're talking about across the world, and what their view of the world was, and shared that with 3,000 world leaders. It doesn't, those two worlds don't collide. There's no mirror world there, but it actually articulated the ambition they have, how excited they were, and for your benefit, Beta, they don't believe privacy died. They believe it'll ever die. They believe there's a security-minded approach to it. That's quite a big topic, and we can't really get into it today. But they also subscribe to this privacy preserving. And the combination of those two things are essentially creating new trust models. So in essence, to answer that question, Olga, it's about how can you interact with the value you bring as you deliver whatever you do online, in order to interface with their trust models and how they work, because quite frankly, you will not even know they're there if your value isn't framed that way. So I'm creating a new initiative in order to bridge that gap I've just described, which I've called the CyberSafe community. Now, personally, I will mentor those entrepreneurs in order to make that connection you're asking about, because it is a chasm, and effectively we are in two parallel worlds. But I've evidenced with the work I've done to these new tribes that we demonstrate real value, but it's very hard to reposition to their world because there isn't a direct connection. And so I've personally committed, I've stood down all my other responsibilities on mentoring to mentor 1 million entrepreneurs to bridge that gap. And CyberSafe community is the offering that will do that, because it is a very tricky thing to navigate, and it's not something that will happen without some new skills, some new approaches, some new business models, and the commercial models are completely different. So I've had 27,000 CXOs that have helped me get that far, and now I have a success plan that I can scale and share. And I think, you know, there's many other people that might figure out a way of doing it, but I couldn't figure out a way without actually doing it for real, finding the success path. And then I'm planning to share that with entrepreneurs that understand the value of the question you're asking. But it's a really good question.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Jacqui. That's fabulous news. Well done on your new project. Are all the places taken, or is there a place in your community to join your special project?
So obviously my number one goal, I work in counterterrorism, my number one goal is to make sure that criminals don't get access to it. So all the technology we built ourselves, so it's not going to be on social platforms like we're speaking today. I have a community on Facebook, which everybody's welcome to join. You have to be admitted to it because it's closed, it's private, which is called the empathy economy, because everything we talked about today, I term the empathy economy. You're welcome, Olga. Pleasure to talk with you. So the empathy economy Facebook group, you can just look that up. You'll find us. There's only one. And essentially that's to allow, that's a free resource to allow some of the questions to be asked, just so that I can make sure we start in a great place for everybody that comes into the CyberSafe community, in order to start to have some of the conversations like the one that Olga had. I've got a page on Facebook called CyberSafe Entrepreneurs. I can obviously, Beta, I can give you the details, the credentials for this, and that you can share with on your channel. But essentially, and those resources will always be free. But in order for us to reposition in this, the way I've just described, to answer Olga's question, the reality of it is it's new skills, but it has to be in a way that is cyber safe. Now, there's two things here. Number one, the people that have had a pay rise, the people that have thrived in this COVID crisis, this isolation economy, are the criminals. So the new approach has to be in order to make sure that anything we do and we create in the empathy economy isn't automatically leveraged by them. So that's one of the things. And then the second thing is we will need to respond to the changing environment, because until we have a vaccine for this virus, we are not going to have a lot of stability in how we do things. And so the orchestration of how we build our businesses will be more effective if we're a community. And so I'm welcoming those people that I'm connecting with, like I am with you and your communities today, into both the empathy economy and in terms of the signals and the change that we'll be making. The Cyber Safe Entrepreneurs page on Facebook will give sort of general things, but nothing that I wouldn't want a criminal to read. So by its nature, and I've committed to update the discussions in the empathy economy on a regularish basis. But my focus, because I've stood down all my other responsibilities, is the entrepreneurs that are coming with me in the cybersafe community. Now, I would be giving you a date for when it launches and tell you how it will work. But last week I was onboarded as an expert advisor to the United Nations, because of course I've done what I've done for the G20 economists, 60% of the world's GDP, but that isn't the world. And from an inclusion agenda point of view, that's one part of it. But now I will get the opportunity to work with the team that is and put together a plan to bring the rest of the world's economies into this empathy economy and this change that we've talked about, which is hugely exciting, but has rather meant that I've been had to put my plans back. So in the meantime, the Empathy Economy Group and the Cyber Safe Entrepreneurs page are resources for free to sort of see what I'm up to. And then again on Facebook or on LinkedIn, I'm Dr. Jacqui Taylor. Catch up with me there. I share what I can publicly, and my plans will be there. But I'd be delighted to welcome everybody, because I'll be really honest, this is a very difficult thing we're talking about. It's difficult to do. It will need many talents. It will need many people with very different experiences. But more than anything, it's not a competitive economy. It's a collaborative one. And so actually we all have something to offer.
Oh, absolutely. And even Dr. Jacqui Taylor, as superhuman as she is, cannot deal with all these jobs, but kudos to you. It's a great to hear you're going to work on another new exciting project. Congratulations, Dr. Jacqui. I'm really thrilled for you. That's going to be actually a world of opportunity for you, and I think for many females, because we need more role models.
You said that already, didn't you? You said that already, and I knew I had to step up. I'll be really honest. When I did when I delivered the plan to the G20 in February, I realised that actually we all need to stand up and deliver our value, because it is going to take all of us. It's a very challenging job, but the gains or the wins or the society will create as a result will literally change outcomes for people across the world. I mean, who wouldn't want to be part of that? I think from a female entrepreneur, particularly in tech, there's a social responsibility or a social dimension to what we do. I mean, we're the nurturers of society largely, and so that's perhaps comes from that. But I think we're interested in things outside of our own sphere. We tend to, whether that's because we're just curious, whether it's because we just like to know, I don't know. But the fact that we're interested means that we will look in the world in a broader sense than just about us. And so I do believe that in putting that together and committing to be available for that community for the next 2 years and not doing any other work like that will mean that I'll be accountable. And I'm looking for the entrepreneurs who also want to be accountable, because the mission is a big one. But how exciting the future. And the new tribes, they're amazing to work with. They're absolutely amazing. My youngest entrepreneur is 5. So it's like, wow.
Fantastic. Well, I think it actually, my theory is more women are involved in social kind of interaction. And here is a simple example. I was actually a mentor of an NGO called J Malta, which is Young Entrepreneurs Malta. And there are majority of managers in many companies are males, but somehow these males didn't come and didn't volunteer to be mentors. Majority of mentors during this program were females, which shows how much caring female entrepreneurs are. So, and there is a huge potential and huge amount of money to be made if you take women seriously. So I'm really pleased to touch upon this topic and hear this exciting news. And we've got.
And can I just say, it's a differentiator. Yeah. So the G20 plan, I was able to demonstrate it's the difference between 4.4% growth and none. So it actually is a differentiator in your organization, your nation, your sector as to how you will thrive or not in the industrial Internet of Things. So it's not a question of will I, it would be a question of what you will do if you don't. So I actually have the evidence. The evidence I presented at Davos in 2019 was why you can't afford not to. Now, if you can do that at nation state level, you must be able to do, you must recognize the value of that at an organization level. So I think we've passed the window that said, would we? And because 40% of the world's GDP is influenced by Gen Z, you're effectively alienating 40% of your future market if you don't do it. And one thing that I perhaps should say on this, when people go, oh, well, I'm not sure if it matters. I have this conversation in boardrooms all the time. It matters if you want to double the return on investment that you make for the industrial Internet of Things. And our most successful client has created 60 times, 60 ROI. But on average, they create a double the investment, return on investment. That's P&L positive. For most organizations, this is a cost, but not for this, because it actually does deliver that value. It's very exciting. But it's because we've got these younger generations, we've got the change in technology as being an enabler, and the addition of the industrial Internet of Things doing some of the heavy lift and shift work that before humans were having to do. And that meant that scale was limited. Not all of our technologies work across the planet. We don't differentiate on one country or another. They're planet scale. And that, for the future of IT services, is where we are.
Oh, absolutely. Great. We've got another question from one of our followers. How to keep data hygiene and protection when using home office networks? I think it's everybody's nightmare. How do you protect?
So that's a really big question. So it has to start with the way in which, so I just wonder, I haven't got access to it this second, but there's some World Economic Forum research that we did about the cybersecurity aspects across our nations, across our organizations. But this is an element, so the reason it's a really good question, this is an element that's usually forgotten. But in this crisis, where many of us are working from home and we're using capability and facilities and connecting via our corporate networks or our organizational networks, that reveals a real risk to do that. So it has to start with where you actually have your connection into your house. But it's not just things like your router you need to worry about. It's things like I think from memory, the second biggest risk is your alarm system. And then things like your I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but essentially there are 10 top areas within your home that are key risks. And because the cyber criminals are utilizing the fact that we're all online, effectively it is making our homes more accessible to what they do. And of course, the more we layer on devices that are connectivity out from our home and then they connect out from our home, then more so it is. So I think that the reality of it is we do have to think about our own infrastructure in our houses. And of course, in my house, where you're seeing me from today, our infrastructure is probably as good as anybody's out there, because what happens in here is pretty much what we do for clients. But so I'm not suggesting you all have to become cybersecurity experts, but you do have to think about that. And I think it's a really good question, because it's something that I haven't actually been asked. I've spoken a lot about during this crisis, but nobody's actually asked me that question. So whoever did ask that, well done to you. But you have to start with your router. You have to think about every connected device, your voice assistants. You have to think about what you're enabling as technology. because we tend to sprinkle these things across the house. And, you know, it's a basic thing, like I've done some safeguarding in this crisis for our young people who've been being groomed on Zoom by pedophiles. And so how do we as communities, how do we as teachers, how do we as mums protect our children? And I'm currently in the process of pulling that advice together into a downloadable giveaway for those people that know me, which will come up, which will be given on the Cyber Safe entrepreneurs page, because actually for most people this is way beyond where they understand. But actually the issue is now, and it's not from a point of view of we should be fearful, but it's from a point of view of this is where our society is heading, and I wouldn't like us to sleepwalk our way into that future. So privacy is not dead, but it's changed. So I've just been recognised, this work I'm talking about, by our information commissioner in the UK. So she has recognised 6 data protection practitioners of excellence, because I don't stop what I do from just a commercial point of view. I think of it holistically as a society, but I think of us as individuals, families, communities, and our part in it. So it's a layered approach. And apparently, you know, the other people don't look at privacy like that. But I think the reality of it is we all have a part to play. And it's a very intuitive question to ask about the security in our homes. But you start with, I have a top 10 thing. If anybody gets in touch with me, I'll give them a download for the research, because I just didn't expect that question. I haven't got it at the top of my head, but I will give you a download so you know which order to tackle those things in. And the reality of it is it's something we should know matters, and we should start to look at what we might do about it.
It's actually a lot of peer pressure as well. And I have to say that I felt a little bit uncomfortable when I got an email just a couple of days back asking me to forward this email with my own message with 20 other people I know, and the first email has to appear on the top of the list, and people would then send it over and over. And I really felt uncomfortable knowing that in my circle of friends, people still think it's a good idea to send somewhat positive, but still message that could pose a threat to security of somebody's data. Would you agree with me? Dr. Jacqui, are we there? I think we've lost connectivity, and we are just in time to wrap up to our question time with Dr. Jacqui. I'm really sorry we've lost connectivity. Maybe it's a cyber threat from somebody who wasn't too happy that we are warning from the threats of cyber crime. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, our lovely community, to be with us today. We touched upon the topic of cyber security, cyber crime, privacy. And I think everybody realizes that privacy is no longer the same as it was before COVID-19. And we all have this obligation of protecting our data as much as we can, but obviously some ways of travels, some means of communication has to stay and kind of violate our privacy in order to be able to use these devices, or whether it's mobile phones, whether it's going through the customs at the airport, or whether it's going to be actually coming to a concert and being checked through security. And maybe the future is going to be a scanner scanning your face, your irises, and making sure you're not some criminal trying to get to a concert and blow the things up. Thank you very much. It's another PhD positivity hack delivered by myself, Beata Young, and Dr. Jacqui, who is no longer with us. But if you would like to check her work, as she mentioned, there is cyber safe entrepreneur, and she's been talking about empathy economy and about isolation economy. And I think we all are embracing the fact that we can enjoy the good, not so much the ugly of digital world. And I encourage you all to shift from being community of users of technology into community of creators of technology. Stay safe. I want you to succeed. Thank you for watching the show. Goodbye till next Wednesday.